Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we explore the world's trickiest politics with just the right mix of insight and side-eye. You've sent us some really fascinating sources today, and we're definitely ready to unpack them. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something, well, critically important regarding Japan's foreign policy. We're featuring commentary from Daisuke Kondo, who is a well-known voice on international affairs. He's breaking down this concept he calls bichu, which apparently points to Japan's long tradition of maybe flattering China a bit too generously.
It's a really pivotal concept, yeah. And our sources today, they give us a pretty unfiltered look. Kondo actually speaks with Shingo Yamagami, who you might know as the former ambassador to Australia. They're discussing Yamagami's new book, co-written with Ryusho Kudoda. And this book takes a, shall we say, critical look at Japan's historically maybe submissive stance toward China.
Submissive, huh? It sounds like a really rare peek into that clash between diplomacy and, well, national pride, especially maybe in a society that can sometimes feel a bit isolated, diplomatically speaking.
That's a good way to put it. And this book, Yamagami and Kudoda's book, Kudoda himself, is described as a wild animal of a commentator. Used to be a reporter.
A wild animal, okay.
Right, and it's already a bestseller. Sold something like 30,000 copies.
Wow, okay. So people are clearly interested in this perspective.
Seems like it. Their stated goal, Yamagami and Kudoda's, was really to give the Japanese public a clear, sort of unvarnished look at the issues with China, to move past just, general complaints and offer specific, actionable insights. The source even uses this metaphor of identifying and excising pathogens from the diplomatic body.
Pathogens. Strong language.
So
less vague blaming, more specifics.
Exactly. The idea was to avoid just pointing fingers at, say, certain political groups or the foreign ministry's China school, those diplomats focused on China, sometimes seen as more conciliatory. Instead, they wanted to lay out concrete cases, name actual names involved. The sources say this empowers the public, lets them judge if Japan's approach is working, what's wrong, and crucially, what needs to change.
Okay, right. Let's unpack this concept then, bichu. What does it actually mean? Why call it a disease in Japanese diplomacy?
Well, the sources frame bichu as this pervasive tendency deep within Japan's way of dealing with China. It's an inclination to be overly accommodating, maybe too deferential, even flattering. And it's seen not just as, a minor weakness, but as a systemic problem, almost like a chronic condition that really hurts Japan's national interests at standing. It suggests this pattern where maintaining harmony or the appearance of harmony takes priority, even over asserting fundamental rights or pushing back against, frankly, clear provocations.
Okay, so if it's this pervasive tendency, what does that look like on the ground in actual interactions? Can you give us some examples from the sources where this bichu approach really played out?
Absolutely. One really striking example the sources bring up is the whole issue with gas field development in the East China Sea. Back in May 2008, President Hu Jintao, who was China's leader then, visited Japan, and they supposedly agreed on joint development of these fields.
Right. I remember something about that. A big deal at the time.
It was meant to be. But here's the fascinating, or maybe concerning part. Later on, when the Senkaku Islands issue heated up, that's the territorial dispute over those uninhabited islands.
Which is always simmering, yeah.
Exactly. Well, the Xi Jinping administration, according to the sources, simply ignored that 2008 agreement, just acted like it never even happened, left Japan kind of high and dry.
Wow. So the agreement just evaporated. And this wasn't like a one-off thing, was it? It sounds like maybe part of a bigger picture.
No, the sources argue it absolutely wasn't isolated. They point to this recurring pattern, especially in things like setting up fishery zones in the East China Sea. Instead of firmly marking out its economic boundaries, its rights, Japan often went for a compromise, almost like a let's just split the difference kind of approach. Some of claims divided by two, as one source puts it. And this habit, this reflex almost, to seek compromise right away, even on core issues like national sovereignty, territory, whether it's Senkaku or the northern territories with Russia, or Takeshima with South Korea.
All major sticking points.
Right, or even historical narratives. It's presented as this deeply ingrained, problematic habit. It's like the default is to de-escalate, which, ironically, the sources suggest might just encourage the other side to push harder next time.
That really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How does a nation handle those moments when its sovereignty is directly challenged, especially if this bichu thing is so deeply rooted?
It's a critical question. And the sources provide a really stark example from August 2022. Remember when Nancy Pelosi, then the U.S. House Speaker, visited Taiwan?
Oh, yeah. Tensions spiked massively then.
They did. And in response, China launched 5 ballistic missiles. And these missiles landed squarely within Japan's exclusive economic zone, the EEZ, the sea area where Japan has special rights.
5 missiles
Yes.
into their EEZ is
That's
huge.
yeah.
I mean, standard diplomatic playbook, Chapter 1, surely you haul in the ambassador for something that serious, right? Issue a very strong protest.
You would absolutely think so. It was completely unprecedented from China, a direct, unambiguous challenge to Japan's sovereign space, international law, everything. And yet, the response, according to these sources, was surprisingly muted. Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi, who apparently describes himself as China literate, not pro-China, interestingly.
Okay.
He didn't summon the Chinese ambassador. He reportedly passed the job to the vice foreign minister, Takeo Mori. And Mori wasn't even from the China school. He was a German expert.
So not even the specialist.
Apparently not. And even then, Mori reportedly didn't do a formal summoning. He opted for a phone call instead.
Wait, a direct missile incident into the EEZ met with a phone call, not even a face-to-face dressing down.
Exactly, a phone call. And the sources stress this isn't an isolated incident, it's part of that pattern. China's ambassador apparently wasn't summoned when Japan's seafood got banned by Beijing, over the Fukushima water release claims.
Right, the contaminated water issue.
Or for various controversies around Yasukuni shrine visits. Or even, the sources say, when a Japanese citizen was murdered in China. It builds this picture of what the sources call unrequited diplomacy. Japan keeps sort of pulling its punches, not meeting provocations with equal firmness. It suggests this consistent, almost ingrained weakness.
Okay, I have to ask, from China's viewpoint, surely this looks like a green light, doesn't it? An invitation to just keep pushing, see how far they can go.
That is precisely the grave concern highlighted in the sources. They confirm China does test boundaries. They probe for weakness constantly. If Japan doesn't respond firmly, consistently, China sees that as, well, maybe tacit acceptance or at least a lack of resolve, and they'll keep pushing, taking one slice of salami at a time, as the saying goes. The authors, Yamagami and Kadota, argue that Beijing understands its own wolf warrior diplomacy, that really aggressive style needs to be met with firmness, not, they stress, to start fights, but purely to protect national interests and deter more encroachment. Silence, or a weak response, is itself a message.
So if this bichu problem is so clearly detrimental according to these sources, why is it happening? Is it just down to a few individuals? Or are there deeper things going on, systemic issues maybe?
The sources definitely suggest it's a mix of factors, all deeply tangled together. It spans things like the diplomatic culture itself, the structure of the bureaucracy, and yes, even the quality or perceived quality of political leadership. It's not just one thing.
Okay, let's try and untangle that a bit. Starting with the diplomatic culture. What's the core problem there, as the sources see it?
The core issue they flag is that ingrained tendency we talked about, seeking compromise on things that maybe shouldn't be compromised, like territory, sovereignty, core historical facts. Now, compromise is obviously essential in diplomacy, nobody denies that. But the argument here is that there are clear lines a nation shouldn't cross lightly. And the worry is that Japan blurs those lines too often, makes concessions where maybe firmness is needed. That pursuit of harmony can backfire when you're dealing with a very assertive power.
Right. And what about the foreign ministry itself? Any structural things there, how people are chosen, how they operate?
What's another big area the sources delve into? There's this important question about the people inside the ministry. One perspective mentioned is, well, that many bureaucrats are products of Japan's very exam-focused education system. Brilliant analysts, maybe, but perhaps lacking the assertive edge, the fighting skills needed for tough diplomacy.
Interesting point.
But maybe more critical, the sources point to a big shift around 2014. That's when the Cabinet Bureau of Personnel got the power to oversee senior appointments. We're talking about 600 top jobs, Director General level and up. This basically gave the Prime Minister and the Chief Cabinet Secretary a veto over who gets promoted to these key positions.
So essentially, if the top politicians don't like you, or maybe if you seem too independent or likely to cause waves, you don't climb the ladder.
That's exactly the concern raised. The sources argue this system has created an environment where top officials might feel pressure to become, well, the source uses the term puppies to politicians, prioritizing political loyalty over independent judgment or even what's best for the country long term. There's also apparently a clear pattern where being a secretary to a powerful politician almost guarantees you a top job later, like vice minister, maybe regardless of actual aptitude for that specific role.
So it incentivizes playing the political game over actual diplomatic skill or public service.
That's the critique. It leads to a focus on connections, not necessarily merit. And the sources lament this as a loss of the official's way, that ideal of independent bureaucrats speaking truth to power, the consequence. Talented younger officials get disillusioned and leave. It's like a brain drain driven by, well, politics overriding substance.
That certainly paints a concerning picture of the bureaucracy.
Hmm.
But what about the politicians themselves? The sources mentioned a potential deterioration. Does that feed into this bichu issue too?
Yes, absolutely. The sources argue that a lack of what they call statesmanship or tikgaku, it's a term for the art of being a wise, strong leader, is a major factor. They contrast today's politicians with older generations, maybe those who'd lived through the war or had really struggled and built themselves up from nothing. Now, apparently over 70% of Diet members are hereditary politicians.
Inherited seats, basically.
Right. Many, the argument goes, haven't had much real-world experience outside the political bubble.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Do the sources give concrete examples of this perceived lack of statesmanship and how it might affect diplomacy?
They do, quite pointedly, actually. They single out two prominent figures as examples, Koizumi Shinjiro and Ishiba Shigeru. Koizumi is described as, very polished, maybe eloquent at something like a wedding speech, but lacking real substance or depth when it comes to serious policy discussions. Sort of style over substance is the implication.
Okay, and Ishiba.
With Ishiba, despite his education, they mention he apparently struggles quite a bit with English, which is, pretty fundamental for international diplomacy. But more tellingly, they criticize his actual conduct in diplomatic settings. For instance, meeting Xi Jinping and using two hands to shake Xi's single outstretched hand. In Japanese culture, that's deep deference, but internationally, it could look overly submissive.
I see. Optics matter.
Optics matter hugely. They also mention things like his table manners, his wife's attire at formal functions, even apparently looking at his phone during international meetings instead of networking with other leaders.
So these aren't just minor slips in etiquette. What's the bigger significance, according to the sources?
Well, the sources argue these details point to something deeper, a lack of maybe fundamental diplomatic bearing, an inability to project national dignity and confidence effectively. And when Ishiba apparently gets criticized for these things, his reaction is reportedly to just dismiss it all as slander, rather than considering how these actions are perceived abroad and what that means for Japan's image. It suggests a disconnect, maybe reinforcing that bichu tendency by having leaders who don't fully grasp or perhaps don't prioritize how to conduct themselves assertively on the world stage.
Right. So putting it all together, the sources Kondo, Yamagami, Kadota, they're making a really strong, almost urgent case that Japan needs a fundamental shift in its approach, especially towards China.
Absolutely. Unequivocally. The core message coming through from that Yamagami and Kadota discussion is that Japan must adopt a much more assertive diplomacy. They use the term fighting diplomacy. And they're careful to say this isn't about being needlessly aggressive or looking for trouble. It's about proactively, vigorously protecting Japan's national interests, its territory, its sovereignty, its people. Their argument is stark. Failing to speak up, failing to push back firmly and consistently just makes Japan look weak and invites being disregarded. China is watching, they insist. And Japan's perceived lack of consistent firmness just encourages Beijing to keep testing those boundaries. They argue Japan needs to be far more resolute, much more decisive, and frankly more strategically assertive in how it deals with China. Respect, they imply, is earned through strength, not just politeness.
It's a powerful critique. And speaking of rare gems, our producer FireflyHaku deserves huge credit for making this deep dive sound sharper than a diplomat's suit. You really helped bring the nuance of this complex topic to life.
The insights from Daisuke Kondo and Shingo Yamagami really do offer a crucial lens here. It's not just about the day-to-day political chess moves, is it? It's about understanding these deeper cultural currents, the systemic issues that shape how a nation presents itself to the world.
Absolutely. So subscribe to the Deep Dive, because when world affairs get messy, we're here to make sense of it.
Grateful for your ears. Definitely spread the word, and please join us again soon.